President Biden this week will announce his long-awaited task force to reunite migrant families separated at the border. The president is expected to also announce executive actions focused on refugee resettlement and asylum in the U.S. But the new administration's efforts to undo Trump-era policies have stalled. CBS News reports many of the former president's border rules remain in place, leaving thousands of asylum seekers stranded or facing expulsions. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez. So Camilo, you have some new reporting out today on how U.S. border policy has changed and not changed, really, under the new administration. Tell us more about it, about the policy specifically asylum seekers and migrants are encountering once they get here to the United States, especially during the pandemic.
Yes, good morning, Vlad. During the campaign, President Biden strongly denounced Mr. Trump's border policies, accusing the previous administration of forcing asylum seekers to live in dangerous conditions and in squalor on the other side of the Rio Grande. Mr. Biden, since taking office, has suspended the so-called Remain in Mexico asylum program, and he's set to formally end the policy this week through an executive order that will change how border officials process migrants and asylum seekers going forward. However, the Biden administration has yet to say, Vlad, what they will do with the estimated 20,000 asylum seekers currently waiting in Mexico with pending asylum cases. Will they allow these asylum seekers to continue their immigration proceedings in the U.S.? That is still unclear. In addition to that, the Biden administration has continued to use a Trump-era CDC policy to rapidly expel migrants and asylum seekers, including families with children, without allowing them to request U.S. humanitarian refuge. And this policy was one that was authorized by the CDC last spring under the premise that if the U.S. allows migrants to come into the U.S. during the pandemic, they may spread the coronavirus inside immigration detention centers and broader border communities.
When this policy, this Remain in Mexico policy, was first put in place, you spoke to us about what families were enduring as they waited for permission to cross into the U.S. to ask for asylum. But that was before there was a pandemic. You've spoken to families who are waiting now. What is life like for them? And are they hopeful that their fortunes might improve?
Well, I'll give you one example, Anne-Marie. I spoke with an asylum-seeking grandmother from Nicaragua who fled political persecution in her home country because she was opposed through the ruling government there that has been accused by the Trump administration and the Biden administration of committing human rights abuses. And so she has been staying with her granddaughters and her daughter in Matamoros, Mexico for nearly a year and a half. They've been living in a tent on the other side of the U.S.-Mexico border waiting for their asylum case to be adjudicated. But asylum hearings during the pandemic have been postponed indefinitely, so they don't know when they're going to get a decision on their cases. And while they wait, they have to wait in one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, in a state that the U.S. State Department actually warns Americans not to visit because of the rampant crime and violence there. So that is a predicament that many of these asylum seekers currently find themselves in. They are right now in a state of limbo. Many of them are hopeful that things will change under this current administration, which has pledged to implement more welcoming policies towards asylum seekers. But at this point right now, Anne-Marie and Vlad, many of them hope their fortunes will change, but it's still unclear when and if that will happen.
So, Camilo, President Biden is set to issue several executive orders on immigration tomorrow, including one addressing the processing of migrants and asylum seekers along the border. What can we expect?
Sure. So we expect this executive order to formally end the Remain in Mexico policy. It will also terminate several agreements that the Trump administration brokered with the three countries in Central America's Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that allowed U.S. border officials to send asylum seekers to those countries and have them seek asylum there instead of here in the U.S. Those agreements will be scrapped under this order. The order is also expected to, as you said, recalibrate U.S. efforts at the U.S.-Mexico border and reshape how border officials will process migrants going forward. So there are still a lot of open questions about what will happen to, again, the asylum seekers waiting in Mexico and to this expulsion policy that was authorized by the CDC. That is still unclear. But we also expect, as you mentioned earlier on in the segment, that one of these executive orders will create a task force for the families who remain separated after their separation during the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy.
Yeah, President Biden has made that a priority, bringing these families back together. But, we've listened to your reporting over the last year or so about just how messy the whole situation has been, how there's a lack of documentation, how, in some cases parents were deported and their children are still here. What are some of the challenges that President Biden is expected to face with this task force that is supposed to be focused on reuniting families?
Well, remember, Anne-Marie, that this court case surrounding family separations goes back to 2018, and advocates and lawyers have been spending years trying to find all the families that were separated under these policies and previous pilot programs that the Trump administration implemented before expanding zero tolerance across the entire border. Right now, they still have not located more than 600 parents. They have outdated phone numbers from the government that don't work anymore. The addresses on file are not helping them, and they are right now on the ground in these Central American countries trying to locate these parents through addresses of family members and other leads, because that's the only way now that they can find these quote-unquote unreachable parents. And so it will be important for us to see what the Biden administration will offer in terms of help to these groups. Will it offer State Department resources, for example, to help these groups locate these parents in Central America? And another big question is to the families who are still here, because even though many of those families were reunited here on American soil, all of them are facing deportation because they lack legal status. The only way they can stop that deportation is if they obtain asylum. Will the Biden administration offer these families some sort of legal status to redress the damage caused by the Trump administration to their children and to these families?
So Republicans have criticized the president's immigration agenda. Some are arguing that it encourages more illegal migration. Texas has already convinced a judge to block the administration's deportation moratorium. So what sort of opposition can we expect going forward, and could it derail the president's immigration agenda?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it has already derailed one of his key immigration campaign promises, which was to freeze deportations for his first 100 days. That has been suspended by a judge in Texas after the state filed a lawsuit arguing that this policy was illegal and that it could harm Texas because undocumented immigrants would be released in the state and would require social services and the like. That policy has been blocked, and states like Arizona have already also threatened to sue the Biden administration if it continues to implement these campaign pledges on immigration. So I think we can expect many of these lawsuits to occur in the coming weeks. And another area of opposition is in Congress. I think we will see opposition from Republicans to Mr. Biden's proposal to place the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. on a pathway to U.S. citizenship, because Mr. Biden's proposal, as it stands right now, Vlad and Emery, does not contain many immigration enforcement components that have typically been seen as key to garnering Republican support. So it's important for us just to monitor that in the coming weeks.
All right, Camila, always good talking to you. Thank you so much. So listen, for more on Camilo's latest piece on the Biden administration's immigration agenda, you should check out our website. You can find that at cbsnews.com. So Weijia Jiang is joining us now from the White House, along with Kris Van Cleave, who's joining us from Capitol Hill. Weijia, going to start with you. What can we expect from today's meeting between President Biden and the group of Republicans?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of disagreement, frankly, if you look at what these Republicans are proposing and what President Biden has said all along, including in the statement from the White House that we saw last night. They couldn't be more clear that they think they have to take big, sweeping action. And they've said many times on the record already that they are not interested in a smaller, watered-down version of his proposal, or one that is narrower in scope. He has said many times that he's using the advice of many economic experts and saying that the time to act is now. He says this is an investment into the future of the country's economy, because if you don't put this money into the economy now, he argues that there will be a long-term scar that will be much more expensive than his nearly $2 trillion price tag. And in that statement last night, the White House also said that the concern is doing not enough, not doing too much. And one last thing that really caught my eye was a figure in the White House statement of $1,400 stimulus checks. Of course, as you just heard in the piece, that is what the president is pushing for, along with the $600 that have already gone out to many people, a total of $2,000, which is what he promised Americans. And so I think that's going to be a real sticking point for them, because the Republicans want to shrink that down to $1,000. And, I don't think the White House is going to accept that offer.
So, Kris, as we saw in Weijia's report, the president and Democrats have signaled they are ready to forge ahead with this latest relief bill, with or without Republican support. So what's the timeline looking like for getting this legislation passed?
Well, if you think about it moving in sort of a parallel track, the House and the Senate are planning to have a budget resolution on the floors as early as this week. And that would be the foundation of this reconciliation process that Democrats may use. So they're going to start that process and get a budget resolution down on the floor as soon as this week. That doesn't rule out the possibility of a bipartisan agreement. You would just then change the language in those bills. I think the other thing to think about here, when you look at the 10 Republicans that are meeting with the president today, that only gives you 60 votes, assuming that all of the Democrats would agree to this compromise, which leaves any one of those Republicans, if they fall out, you're still short of the 60-vote margin you would need to do this in a bipartisan manner. So it certainly, from the House and the Senate perspective, they're going to continue to move forward with reconciliation until there's a reason not to.
So, Weijia, onto another topic. Former President Trump's second impeachment trial is set to begin next week. Over the weekend, he had a bit of a shuffle in his legal team. Several attorneys quit, and he brought a couple of other attorneys on his team. One of them, Bruce Castor, we're familiar with in Pennsylvania because he used to be the district attorney in Montgomery County. Montgomery County is the county that oversaw Bill Cosby's case, his initial case, when he's initially accused of sexually assaulting a 31-year-old woman. We know how that all turned out. But initially, Castor refused to pursue any sort of prosecution. So he comes with a little bit of baggage. But what can you tell us about this shuffle?
So over the weekend, you're right, the president's first defense team fell apart amid reports that he really wanted lawyers to play up baseless claims of election fraud, which, of course, we've been hearing from Mr. Trump himself since even before Election Day, while his first attorneys wanted to focus more on whether impeachment was even constitutional, given he is now out of office. And so finally, after we pressed many, many times, the Trump team announced they do have that new legal team in place, which, as you mentioned, includes Bruce Castor, along with David Schoen, who previously represented Roger Stone. Of course, he is that longtime Trump associate who was convicted in charges linked to the Russia investigation, but ultimately pardoned by President Trump. And so there's a little bit of baggage there as well. But you look at the time frame, I mean, this trial begins on Tuesday, and so he had to, cobble together a legal team very quickly, and, that's perhaps why, these aren't exactly his first choices, but certainly now the Trump team says they are confident that they will move forward, and ultimately that the president will be found innocent and not convicted of these charges.
So, Kris, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer addressed some of the hurdles the Senate faces ahead of the impeachment trial. Let's hear some of what he had to say yesterday.
We hope to continue negotiating on the impeachment resolution and reaching a bipartisan agreement. We have agreed that the trial will start on February 8th, but we need to reach an agreement on how it's conducted.
So, Kris, what can we expect from this impeachment process moving forward this week into next week? I'm curious to know if you've heard, Kris, from any Republican lawmakers, if more are willing to find the president guilty of inciting insurrection, given that they seem to be, every time I see a Republican on Fox News, he's talking about unity. And why won't President Biden get on board with what the Republicans want to do? I'm wondering if you're hearing any movement on that end.
I think the 45 Republicans who voted that the trial was unconstitutional speak for themselves on that one. The sense here is that there is virtually no chance of getting 67 votes to convict the president. That would be 17 Republican votes. So it's unlikely that 12 show up beyond the 5 that voted to continue. So we know that there are filings due, sort of pretrial proceedings due this week from the Trump team. House impeachment managers will have to respond to that by the 8th, and then it's likely next Tuesday, as Weijia was saying, that this trial gets started. It's not a lot of time for the new Trump legal team to get their filings together and get prepared. We know the House managers have been working diligently and will be in a position to begin on the 9th. What the framework of that trial looks like, that still remains an open question. The sense is that certainly when you talk to senators on either side of the aisle, that they would like to move quickly to hold this trial and move on, particularly given really everyone's sense here that there's not going to be the votes to convict, that it's probably not going to be a close vote.
Meanwhile, Kris, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's got a lot on his plate, not just dealing with the Democrats, but dealing with his own party. There were calls for 2 congresswomen to be removed from Congress for entirely different reasons. Marjorie Taylor Greene for her support of QAnon conspiracy theories, her support of the social media posts that encouraged violence against other members of the House. And then there is, as well, Liz Cheney. And she's on the other side. There are Republicans that are mad at her for voting her conscience in favor of impeaching former President Donald Trump. How is Kevin McCarthy dealing with this? Are there concerns about the future of, or the impact of these sort of divisions within the Republican Party?
Well, there's absolutely concern. In fact, Representative Adam Kinzinger, who is another one of the 10 House Republicans that voted for impeachment, came out with a pretty powerful video over the weekend launching a new anti-Donald Trump-focused PAC, where he basically said the Republican Party has lost its way. So you have the Liz Cheney situation, which is an effort by a large number of Republicans inside the Republican House caucus that want to strip her of her leadership post. She's number 3 in the line of House Republican leadership. That likely comes to a head on Wednesday during a House GOP call. And then there's the issue of Representative Greene, who seems to just go from one controversy to another up here. There is a resolution to try to expel her from Congress. That's kind of a long shot. It would require 2/3 vote in the House of Representatives. And this is a representative who got a call this weekend from former President Donald Trump showing his support. So as McCarthy, the minority leader, is trying to walk a fine line here. He has made it clear that his belief that the best way for the House to win the majority, for the Republicans to win the majority in the House, is to be aligned with former President Donald Trump. He was in Florida, met with the former president last week. This is, of course, after he first said Donald Trump bore some responsibility for what happened here on the 6th, and then a week later flip-flopped to he did not provoke. If you listen to what he said in the speech, I think was McCarthy's language. So he's juggling a lot here, and you have a Republican Party that there are definitely two different perspectives on the way ahead, and managing that is going to be probably his defining moment here in this Congress, and whether or not it pulls voters to a Republican candidate or if it moves them away will be his big question. But he's certainly got 2 battles there, and with regard to Representative Greene, the more she is in the media, she is using all of this attention to fundraise and has brought in well over $1.5 million in donations to her campaign funds as these controversies have been swirling.
Indeed, and she's been rewarded with a committee assignment, among other things. Thank you very much, Weijia Jiang.
Very controversial assignment. That's right, Vlad.
Education and labor. It very much is a controversial assignment. And I know, Kris, that Republicans are meeting later this week to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's interesting to me that, and we all covered, Al Franken resigning from the United States Senate for his actions of the past that were brought to light. Also, Representative Katie Hill, California, who also left her seat for actions that she was involved in. It'll be interesting to see what Republicans do here, and we'll probably have some on that later this week. Thank you all very much for this. We appreciate it.
Sure thing.